Bom dia, pessoal. Sejam todos bem-vindos aí ao segundo dia.
Good morning. Welcome to our second day of IX Fórum Infrastructure Week. Today, we are going to have a number of technical lectures. They are going to be very interesting. We are going to address a number of topics. We are going to talk about streaming in Brazil, how to connect to Opencdn, the network automation and those highly orchestrated networks, how to forecast the impact of PTTs, ITTs interruptions, and the use of NICs. And at the end of this morning, we are going to have some time for networking. You'll be able to talk, to interact with our speakers, to other panelists and participants. You'll be able to talk about some of your questions, raise your doubts, and so on. But before we start, let me give you some housekeeping messages. We have the session is being broadcasted in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. So just choose the language of your preference. If you would like to hear that in any one of those three languages, just choose the language of your preference. This live participation will generate a certificate. So please just register yourself till 2 p.m. and an email will be sent to you with a confirmation. And by tomorrow afternoon, you are going to get your certificate of participation. And I also like to ask you to give a like in our video so we can spread this information via YouTube. The greater the number of likes we get, the more we'll be able to broadcast this information. And I also like to ask you to share this information at your chat groups, WhatsApp groups, that our Forum 15 is just.
A nossa primeira atividade, pessoal, vai ser desafios da infraestrutura.
Our first activity of the day will address challenges in the Brazilian infrastructure, addressing streaming growth. We are going to have Antonio Marcos Moreira from NIC.br that will be our moderator, and we are going to have speakers from Globo.com and ASEAN. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Eduardo. Good morning to all of you who are connected here today at our Internet Exchange Forum 15. It's a great honor to be here today and also to have you all here connected this morning. I would like to start by thanking Claudney Soares from Globo.com and Rogério Mariano from ASEAN, who supported us to bring together this panel and had agreed to come and talk about this very important topic. Why are we here today? Why have we designed this panel? What have we got in mind? Why are we after some additional solutions? Well, we are here to talk about some challenges that we face in our infrastructure. What is our current situation? Well, Brazil, as everyone says, this is a country of huge continental dimensions. It's a country with several cities and a great number of municipalities, over 5,000 municipalities. Internet Internet dissemination is not exactly the same all over the country. We see differences among the different regions of the country. If you take a look at CITIC surveys and at CITMAT surveys, you'll be able to see how different we are in this country. We have a number of infrastructure disparities. For instance, in Manaus, we are implementing the Opencdn, and we were able to fill a number of obstacles to be able to hire internet broadband or R2 circuits to be able to feed the CDN casts. We can tell indeed how difficult that can be. We have points of traffic spread all over the country. However, that traffic is highly concentrated at those main cities such as São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Porto Alegre, Curitiba. All other points of traffic, they are quite reduced. We also see some of those CDNs, which are the content suppliers, which are highly concentrated at just a few of those points of traffics, PPTs. In face of a number of inequalities, we see a urgent increase in the use of streaming. In the past 2 years with the pandemic, we had witnessed a great increase in the demand for the 5G use, as 5G is the last mile. 5G will be able to replace radio, optical fiber, but if there are no backbones, no backhouses, or a closer content, 5G by itself won't be able to make any miracles, even if users are able to do something at their last mile over their devices, and that may drive even more expectations, because I was told that now with 5G, finally, I'll be able to watch streaming. And there are some game companies that they have this modality, video games, in addition to television and films. They also offer game modalities, which is a new demand. So this is the current status. We see inequalities, CDNs concentrated at just a few PPTs. It's wonderful to have you both here, Global and Asian, because you know our markets pretty well and you perform different actions.
A CDN da Globo se espalhou pelo país, mas
Claudinei will share how CDN Global has spread around the country.
Coisa que a gente quer debater nesse painel. Então, eu vou passar a palavra agora.
Having said all of that, I would like to give the floor to Rogério Mariano. Mariano will not go into details about addressing solutions, but rather he will make some introduction remarks addressing different types of streaming services. We have such a great variety, and he will try to reveal the meaning of those different acronyms and the different sort of streaming services available. After that, we will get back to this panel discussion, and Rogério with Claudinei, they will foster the discussion, and you are all invited to submit your questions, comments via the chat, so we can leverage our debate, which is not a discussion just among the three of us, but rather would like to include everyone who is here connected today. This is the role of our IX Fórum, to discuss upon our internet infrastructure. Okay, you have the floor, Rogério. Thank you, Moreiras, and hello, everyone. Welcome to all participants. What an honor to be here once again participating at Internet Exchange Forum. To my company and to myself, this is the most interconnection relevant forum in the country. This is a highly expected forum in the country, and streaming is a field of discussion which is quite new, with a number of acronyms. So I would share a briefing as if that would be a day zero, so everyone can really understand the meaning of streaming. Can you all see all right my screen? So let's dive into the streaming topic. What is that? You should ask yourselves, what is a TV? This is the first question to start with. And that may sound as an odd question, because we understand that a television is that large box that is placed in a very important part of our home, and that is like a box that used to be hanging somewhere in a cupboard, and now maybe you hang that on your own. But if I would tell you that the concept has changed, television now is no longer just a device or a box, but now TV is a software. And this is one of the main transformations that the society has seen in the past decades. This is the first step. If you still recall Kodak, that is an example of a transformation in the audiovisual field, and that's exactly what is taking place with the TV, software, streaming, all the broadcast, all those Apple TVs. We are migrating to a different reality in the next 8 years that will be part of the streaming. How about the open television? Is that going to die? Not necessarily, but what you find, what you have available in your open TV, probably in the next 8 years, that will be available in the live streaming. There are a number of players who are part of these ecosystems. We have OTTM, VPD, live streaming, and many others. We have the over-the-top OTT, which is a service that allows users to broadcast online content without necessarily register them on a cable connection. That is a service that runs over the internet to render content. And we also have the multi-channel video program and distributor, MVPD. Those are TV carriers, cable TV operators. So these are the two entities, OTT and MVPD. There is no need to go into details about these two sort of platforms, so just keep those entities in mind. And there are some differences between the two of them. MVPD offers a number of cable TVs and satellite TVs, whereas OTT is responsible to deliver that content. And there are some differences among them. Well, that cable TV, which I pay monthly, is that MVPD, okay, and Netflix and Global TV is an OTT. Yes, exactly. That is the difference and the definitions. And then we have a number of different jargons and terminologies. Live streaming is the content that is broadcasted over the internet to any computer with no need of performing a download. You can just use and consume that file. And streaming became so popular in the past years. VOD, video on demand, that may be watched via streaming with any device, smart TV, a tablet, smartphone, a computer, you name it. And to allow that access to have a streaming services, you do need to have internet access, and you have to subscribe a services such as Globo.com, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and so on and so forth. We also have linear channels via streaming. Linear channels are those channels with a predefined set list, such as the global television that has its predefined set list, and there is also that modality of live streaming, which is a live content broadcasting services. That may be an event, that may be a live show, or those sports, those that like games, you know what I'm talking about, or maybe that can be a premiere services that will broadcast a football game. This is what I call as a live streaming services.
And right here we can see the jargons. I mean, there are so many acronyms, which is great for us to know. And this is important for you to start to understand how wide streaming is and the differences in each type of streaming, because that will be part of our day-to-day. It is already, and it will be more and more. So the first one we work with is AVOD, advertising-based video on demand, which is a content delivery model that the user has access to the videos. But these videos have an ad insert. So you tap video and then you're like, okay, I'll watch Game of Thrones here. And that way, right in the middle of the video, you get a 10-15 second ad, which usually you are able to watch, and then you'll be able to get back to your video. And they are made as the pre-rolls, which are the ones that are shown either in the beginning or right in the middle. And these ads take a few seconds, as I said. But YouTube is a platform of AVOD. So this is the first streaming type, AVOD. The second one is the most common, which is SVOD, subscription video on demand, which is to offer content through subscription. And usually when you subscribe to SVOD, you have access to that premium content, newly released, exclusive. You get to the major catalog for that channel. Some type will allow you to download the content so you can watch without having internet connection. And the main example of that is Netflix. Netflix today, and it's getting into the game channel, and it's testing some linear ones. I think in France they just tried recently, but Netflix for a long time has been an SVOD, which is a video library. You subscribe to it, watch it, and that's pretty much it. Different from TVOD. So if you think about Netflix, I mean, there is no ad. So there is no advertisement. It's not AVOD. And Netflix, I mean, has also TVOD, which is the way to pay to transfer content to be able to watch it. So the content's available for some time, they'll be able to watch it for some time. In other words, the pay-per-view of streaming is called TVOD, Transactional Video on Demand. So you want to rent it, you can go there and watch it. So when you have this type, which allows you to be able to rent a specific content within the time grid, I mean, you have TVOD. So it's pay-per-view on streaming. So Disney does that, Amazon does that, Global does that, Apple TV as well. These services of streaming work with SVOD and TVOD. And we have another two actors, I would say, within this scenario, which are newer, I would say, as Andre mentioned, PES, which is Premium Electronic Sell-Through. This is a format that allows the consumer to buy it. So let's say there's a new release of 007, the new one, and you like the film to the extent to which you want to have that film. I want to watch it all the time. I want to have the playlist at least once a week. I'm not going to rent it. So the service provider allows you to buy it. And in some cases, when it's quite relevant, it allows you to rent, to buy, and you have that on contract a year or two, and it would allow you to buy it. And the other type is what we consider PVOD, which is a premium video on demand. So that's the rental. So for instance, just recently, there's a new Marvel film released. So you're like, oh, there's this film, I want to watch it. So it'll give you the possibility to rent for 48 hours. So usually it's a simultaneous content within the streaming room, and you're able to rent for the 48 hours to watch it. And you have that in this time window. This is what's called PVOD. Actually, since this scenario has progressed, these super productions of AV movies has really a shorter interval between the big screen and the on-demand screen. So we start seeing the big releases of the big studios, which is pretty much as it is released on the big movie theater. So actually, this pandemic scenario allowed us to increase that. So this is something that came about because of the restrictions of the movie theaters, because we could not go there. So we're in quarantine for some time. So for that reason, the PES and PVOD leverage greatly. Disney has PES and PVOD, HBO as well, and they brought major movies for the digital platform. So these are two scenarios that we see that have grown greatly in the last 2 years. And it's important for you to know, other than SVOD, AVOD, that PES and PVOD now is part of our day-to-day as a service. And for you to really be top-notch on the jargons, let me go through all of them. So there is two important phenomena where we call cord cutting and cord shaving. And what is that in a nutshell? Cord cutting is when you're there subscribing for an MVPD, a pay TV. So you will subscribe to one, for instance, and you're like, okay, I pay for 300 channels and I just watch a few. So you cancel the service. So I'm sure many people who are here watching us have done that. I'm one of them. So you cancel the cable TV service, and then you have an internet service subscribed, and you hire a streaming one, a Global Play, Netflix, or Amazon. So this is called cord cutting. There's a second movement that is quite important, which is called chord shaving. And what does that mean? Well, you're there paying for the 300 MVPD channels, But your son or yourself, there are 10 that's, like which one channel for kids, a soccer one for news. So you don't cancel the full cable TV service or satellite service of MVPD. You reduce, instead of paying for 300 or 400, you choose 10. And the number left over, or the amount left over, I'll pay for internet access and add global play, for instance. This is called Chord Shaving. This is a very strong movement, and this has been setting the rule. And why did I add this to this? Because it has really shown the importance of infrastructure for streaming. So I don't know if Anatel has a research to study the phenomenon of cord cutting and cord shaving, because it's quite relevant, and how this is being evolving. So we can go into some topics here, but how will they have this if they have access to the internet from their phone, and it's zero rating access? So there are many ways to talk about this, but this is an important movement to talk about. And I should close my presentation here with my email, contact information. And this was just a technical presentation to talk about infrastructure and to make sure we're all on the same page with all the jargons in streaming. Great. Thank you very much, Rogério. Thank you for your presentation. I believe we can now go back to having all three on our YouTube screen, and we'll start to the discussion, just talking about the jargon. I have, it's hard for me. Sometimes I really get all mixed up, but there's one that I always criticize, not just because of not using it, because the whole market uses it. There's no way to set aside. But we need to look into it with a critical look, which is OTT. And why? As I mentioned, because it's relevant to this discussion, because when we talk over the top, it's something that it's over other or another one. It's not part of it. So if we look at the whole streaming world from a telecommunication standpoint, I believe over the top is a perfect term, and it fits really well, because the internet itself, if we take a look from a telecommunication standpoint, it is an over the top. It is running over the telco world, not only over the telco world. There are also other infrastructure points that are very important, like data centers, that are also some of the weaknesses we do have to be improved when it comes to the streaming in our country. But when we look into OTT from an internet standpoint, and we look at the streaming companies, you and all the other ones that work with that, it's not true. Today, you're much more than just having a service over the internet. You are one of the services that form the internet and are part of the internet. And this whole structure of streaming, of CDNs, it's even more true because of the CDN structure. Today's CDN structure is one that is essential for the internet infrastructure to distribute content. So I just believe we need to look into that topic in a critical way. So now I'd like to hand over back to you guys so you can talk about the whole scenario of which I mentioned in the beginning here of my presentation. And if you agree that the situation is that one, and how you see solutions for that, how can we improve infrastructure for streaming to be able to have this in the country with quality? And this is really the big question for our panel. So I'd like to pass the floor to Claudine, since Rogério already had his own presentation. So Claudine, I'd like to invite you to start the discussion discussion, and then we'll be able to have this openly talked. And if someone would like to add on our chat with questions or comments, I mean, how we can improve infrastructure of the internet in the country when it comes to streaming, what do we need, what are the weaknesses, and what is to be improved. And we will bring this into our discussion. So the floor is yours, Claudine. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Moreira. It's great to always be talking about that, how the infrastructure in the country is doing. And in the way I see it, part of the problem of infrastructure, of streaming, are points reflecting of the infrastructure in our country. We have this, I mean, the cities in the continent, inner continent, and not in the coastal are independently developed, and we don't have many roads, highways, railways, not many that we have connecting cities. And this makes the whole process, because when you have something connecting, I mean, you just have one single place with limited resources, then it becomes really expensive to be able to commercialize. So this is where it stands, and this problem gets worse. And as more remote the region is, the more we have this problem. In the southeastern, we have this region, center west, a bit worse. In the north, it gets even worse because the cities are pretty much remote from each other with no highways connecting them. So you don't have the infrastructure to get a fiber from one city to another. So this type of thing. So talking here about the problem. So thinking about the lack of infrastructure is related to the lack of other type of infrastructure, lack of highways, roadways, because one depends on the other. So it needs to depend on it. How do you see the solution for that? In a way, it depends. I mean, but there are solutions for all these issues. Although there's just one single highway, we can think about going from one side of the highway to the other. And all these features, when they are scarce, you can think about a way to share the resource that you have. You have that fiber, you can invest, I mean, in whoever owns it. I mean, if he's working with a neutral network, they can allow other players to use that fiber. Well, the problem of infrastructure, basic infrastructure, has to do with cost and also because of the resources that are quite scarce. Rogerio, do you agree with that view on it? Do you have any different one? I remember that we talked about this before, and you also talked about the sharing of resource, not specifically on highways, as Claudine mentioned, but sharing resources of telco in a way that would be general with a possible solution to improve the infrastructure scenario. What can you tell us when it comes to that part? Well, when it comes to that, I mean, the scenario could even be worse because streaming did not take steps forward as it should. So to be able to do this, you need three things. The first one is to regulate. And the second point is that advertisement today, 55% of streaming is in over the air. This will change, and we know that will push streaming to grow, and then we get stuck with the infrastructure. So, I mean, this is the point. I mean, we're talking about having this point of investment, which is Maranhão, Amapá, Rondônia, Mato Grosso Sul, which lack infrastructure. Today, what we have is, one of the things is that when we think about the OTT for CDN private, which is global, Netflix and Google, they're consolidated. And as Disney, TikTok, and other ones, the channel. And for other ones, it's a challenge. I mean, with Apple, to even more. Although there are 16 cables, submarine cables, where we have all these different points and all. I mean, thinking about all the big ones and small ones, data centers, and now, I mean, with all of this that is neutral and all, so we are this type of thing of 2019, all these number of users. So we are still concentrated in the coast. I mean, you don't have streaming service that has gone beyond to these states when it comes to infrastructure. So much has been done when it comes to what we said yesterday of the long tail of XBR, because I'm in São Paulo for a CDN. From outside, you won't want to invest. First, because there won't be infrastructure. Second, there's a long tail of 32% of the routes, and Rio 50%, Fortaleza 45%, Paraná 60%. For that reason, it is important to take steps forward to reach these regions. We know that there are possibilities now with 5G. We're talking about FWA, but this is one, I mean, the first myth that should really be torn is that 5G competes with FWA, but it's not present in 100% of the territory. So there's still space. So for streaming, where's the problem? I mean, we need backbone, especially if you're going to have live streaming. I mean, there's this thing about, I mean, this point of to really not have traffic all the way through. So for instance, if you have a soccer match that will take 2 hours, so you need to have the right band for that. And how are you able to invest? I mean, how are you able to really carry on with it? I mean, one of the ways to do it, I believe, is PCDN, which is a great initiative for this type of thing. So that is one point to foster, definitely. And there are things here that could have been better. One point that I believe is very important, if we're going to talk about the neutral data centers that we have around the country, I mean, we can just briefly mention names. They're all very important. Equinix, Dixon, Odata, Activity, Scala, LE Digital, all of these guys. I mean, very rarely will we have them decentralizing, talking about decentralizing. So are we going to get there? You're going to have 5G plus. I mean, what about the last mile? You need to be able to have an ecosystem that is in the region, that's well distributed naturally, so that the carriers today, and here I'm talking about the medium and large ones.
How about the network nowadays? How is the structure? For instance, if we take up north, Rio Grande do Norte state, and a city like Mossoró, a user from Mossoró, that carrier has no PHW, no PDT at that region of Mossoró. Everything is at the capital of the state. So that has to be distributed, that costs a certain amount of money, and we have to understand how to deal with that ecosystem. We have 33 points of traffic of point of exchanges, and maybe to mitigate that first, we could deploy what is so popular all over, which is PayPin, that would improve a regional SP, and also the carrier's life. Carriers, they prefer to have a PT present revenue than PayPs, and second, the incumbent that would communicate their routers, not the whole route, but maybe the partial route within the internet exchange. By sharing services, we are able to improve. And today in Brazil, we have 2,600 cities with no streaming infrastructure. And what's that? The end users at the user's house, they are not able to have a 5 megabits internet, which is the value necessary for streaming purpose. So we suppose that that will not be able to take place with 5G. What's next? As Claudinei said, if we had a growing parallel infrastructure, we would be able to reach those more remote areas. There are some regional areas that are improving their infrastructure, but our main challenge is to still connect those additional 2,600 cities. We have a question addressing that topic. Do we really know how many Brazilian cities have enough structure? Well, we still lack of 2,600 cities, altogether 5,300 municipalities in our federations, and we have 2,600 of those that still need to improve, still need to get additional infrastructure. That according to Anatel, our national agency. You had mentioned the long tail and those who share that perspective, especially international companies that come to Brazil and they connect their services to the main data centers. And I believe that that may fit to another question addressed by our internal XBR team. Considering telco resources, if telco would not be a problem, if we had backbone and backhaul connecting all cities, what else would we still need? Let me rephrase my question. We know that there are some cities that still need to be fulfilled. There are cities that have to meet their needs. And if they connected to a PTT from Rio de Janeiro, or maybe from a different northeast cities, and if they have an agreement with those larger carriers, they will have their issues solved. But nevertheless, that's not a reality. They might be working fine for a great share of users, but not all. And now my question is, what is the best way to solve that? Should we invest on telco infrastructure and maybe reach that ideal scenario? Or would you rather decentralize those CDN infrastructures or streaming? Or should we allocate both simultaneously, or any one of those isolated could help to solve this scenario? I would like to hear you both, because I understand that neither CDN nor ASEAN, they have this centralized performance. You are working on a much more decentralized manner. What is your point of view?
Essa estratégia do pessoal de fora, de entrada de mercado,
foreigners' strategy to enter via Rio, São Paulo, and Fortaleza, well, that makes sense for a marketing entry, as you are able to reach a greater number of users. But for those live streaming, for a more dynamic content, we have a critical latency for content like that. If we have HTTP page to upload an image to a content like that, if you have just 3 points of traffic, fair enough, you'll be able to reach most of the country, fine, and users will understand that that image will take quite a while to be uploaded, but that's fine. But as to a streaming, video streaming, no one will wait for that image upload. A content like that requires a lower latency and a minimum broadband stability. If there is too much variability, if it is running with the 5 megabits and then it goes to 4 and then it switches to 6, that will not be able to support all the streaming because it will lose a part of its premium and it will affect users' experience. That's why Global has invested, and it is still investing a bit more in letting its content, especially video content, as close as possible to end users to decrease the latency and to improve stability during the routes to allow a better visualization and user satisfaction. Would you say that even if the telecommunication services would be better with a more availability or better or higher broadband, still would you go for this sort of strategy? Well, it should be much, much better than it is. If we would switch our route, and if the latency goes from 20,000 milliseconds to 50,000 milliseconds, that will change totally users' experience.
Uma rota principal com 20 milissegundos.
We do need to have a main route with 20,000 milliseconds and the secondary with 21. But we are too far away from this reality. We haven't got such a perfect structure to say that the primary network or primary structure will have no bottlenecks. We have a number of specific questions about global CDN, but I will save those questions to the end of this panel. As we are debating infrastructure generally, I will save those for later on. Would you like to add anything to Claudio's answer, Rogério?
Durante muito tempo, eu acho que primeiro na sua pergunta elas são complementares, tá?
Well, I would say that both needs, one would complement one to another. For a while, international content companies, they had deployed a model which has worked really fine. They just render a content to any place, regardless. They have to know what is the central exchange point of traffic in Brazil. And that has worked quite well for a while. And they understood that they had a low latency codecs such as HLS or CDMAX, but during a live streaming, that would work really well. But for a live streaming purpose, for a game, we haven't. We don't feel it because in Brazil we have football as one of the main entertainment purpose. Asian uses that as a computer content to be distributed, and we understand that all this content has to be spread, as we should not concentrate or centralize, otherwise latency will be too high. And some content distributors, they had realized it, and they are changing the way as they render their services. State-of-art infrastructure relies on distribution, and data centers, they will be a driver for that, as the main data centers, they are concentrated in the larger cities such as São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and by that I mean large data center infrastructures. a natural infrastructure of a data center has to be distributed, and as services they are slowly migrating to streaming services, and global is an example of that. You pushes forward that infrastructure where fibers, backbones have to be constructed, as well as cache to feed it, peeling, and all of that has to be decentralized. Otherwise, especially if you are broadcasting a live entertainment event or a live show, that will not render the proper quality or the expected quality.
Ok. Só estou dando uma olhadinha aqui nas perguntas.
Let me just read through the questions and see what else we have here. Well, there is a comment here from Fernando Frediani who says about IPv6 and the influence of IPv6 over streaming services. And he says that without IPv6, the whole traffic has to go through CGNet with some sort of restraints. And now I'd like to ask to both of you, is that meaningful for the streaming scenario, the implementation of IPv6, I mean? Yes, I agree with his comment. IPv6 is quite possible, and CGNet is a device that impairs the proper function of our streaming. Some CDNs, even for IPv4, they allow some internal solutions that may run within the CGNet infrastructure to prevent users to go over the CGNet. So we offer a number of solutions. We are talking to all carriers, and we have assessed the global cast and assessed the carrier structure. If you have a CGNet implemented, what would be the ideal stage to implement our cast to be able to minimize all issues? And that is a box that represents additional costs to carriers that will have to keep investing on the CGNet, and that will represent some sort of constraints and will impair the streaming deployment. So to switch to IPv6 is mandatory to be able to render the whole content and to avoid this middle tier, which is to go through CGNet. Moreiras is muted.
Obrigado.
Oh, sorry about that.
Sobre o que o Rogério falou há pouco sobre a infraestrutura de data centers, na necessidade de...
How about the data centers infrastructures and the need to have a rather more distributed structure? Would you say that this is the main obstacle for international companies, foreigner CDNs and streaming companies to spread their infrastructures, or there are any additional obstacles, or maybe that is just a different perspective that they share, different from ours, as how the Brazilian internet market works in our country?
Eu acho que nesse ponto isso é algo necessário.
In my opinion, that is key for streaming development. If I am a VP, a revenue officer of any data center, I would be mainly focused on building up a product of low density data center, but present all over, especially at the main largest cities and capitals. Such a setting is not possible because Jeff Ruston, who is the head scientist of NIC, he had forecasted that in the past. Actually, in 2016, he addressed the CDN cone. We led that to extremes, which is those providers that have a global CDN, Asian CDN, Facebook, you name it. They sell that services to the SP markets or IP, confined IPs. But as a matter of fact, there are several issues about that, but it didn't make sense because it allowed smaller SPs to reach a content avoiding the use of a data center. And that scenario was not positive due to the CDN's cones. However, that is mandatory. Content companies, they have nowhere where to host it. If you have a infrastructure, energy, or interconnection assessment to each one of the cities, that is quite difficult if you are not present at those main cities. But you had perceived that while working up north in the state of Manaus. But if you go to Acre or to Roraima or even to Mato Grosso in the meridional area of the country, you do need a host that will be able to feed it. And now to have a business line of data centers that we will, here I'm talking about smaller data centers for CDNs, for pop-up computers that will allow companies to have a greater cache scenario at those sites. That will be very important to allow streaming development in Brazil. I agree with Rogério, and let me add that some cities, they work as hub interconnections or interconnections of hubs. For example, at the state of Minas Gerais, some cities placed in the north of the state, they are not interconnected to the capital of the state. So in our capital, Belo Horizonte, let's say that you have a certain content volume, you do need to allow carriers to have a connection point, exchange point of traffic that will meet demands on the demands from those cities that are in the northern area of the state, or maybe go into other states such as Goiás or the city of Cuiabá, and not only in Mato Grosso, but if you go to Rondônia, which is further north, this perspective that you have some exchange traffic points that will allow access and content sharing same environment that indeed would improve streaming access to our end users. Okay, thank you. We are reaching our time for this first morning activity. We still have a number of specific questions about CDN Global. I will not address them lively as we are running out of time, but I will submit those questions to Claudinei. And if you make to answer those questions, Claudinei, we would appreciate if you are able to answer them and place your answers over the chat. That would be lovely. If not, you can answer those questions later on and send them by email. And next, I would like to ask Claudinei to make your final remarks. Just a minute, Claudinei, and then Rogério, final remarks, and then we may close this debate.
Well, first of all, I mean, we need to think now that with this point of evolving from the end user and the content, we can see that more and more we have to think about solutions of sharing so that the cost is lower, and that way we can have the infrastructure of internet in the country evolve. And when we talk about CDN for Global has an open policy of peering where we have really included the point of presence in the country so everybody can get connected, where we have a portal, peering.global, where we can have the peering. And we have also the cache that we have in some providers, and some, we have a criteria that we have different criteria based on distance. So the operators that is over 100 kilometers of distance of a global POP, they will have a criteria where they will have to prove 2 gigabytes of traffic, and the other ones for cache receival will need to prove a 5 gigabytes. So we have the form for request. There's there to be filled out, and these criteria is to be eligible. So we will go through the analysis. There's a limited number of cache, and we'll be talking with the provider to know when that would be available and suitable. I believe you've already answered all the questions even without having made them. That's pretty much what they had asked. People can come to me at the end of the event. Oh, will you be able to go there to the networking moment, the Gather Town? Yes, we will have some time with the Gather Town platform, and Claudine will be there with us, and will be one extra person to be there with us and to really have the global CDN answered there. So, Rogerio, your final remarks? Well, I'd like to thank you all, NIC.br, XBR again. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and share with you and to really evolve in our streaming. We've mentioned some points, and there are some reminders. The scenario of the different neutral fiber must advance, also of the Amazon. We need to get that out of the drawer so we can have 30 million people reached. It's important. And Brazil in general, ESP regionally, and also with the incumbents, we need to have them think about using pay peering, because that will make the interconnection of the ecosystem much easier. And the truth is that the mentality of Brazil is still in 1997 for interconnection. Since it all started. So we need to have this open. Peering is something that we have all around the world. So the regional ones also need to understand what this is, the pay peering and how it works. We should also need to make it clear that we need to have not all in terms of the internet and services, but we need to think about what's important to think about the ecosystem and investment also of the network. It's something that we will have. The 5G is here to stay. FW will not. It's not any competitor of FTW or FY6, but FTW, it's something we have, and there's much space for that. That's pretty much it for ASIAM. As I mentioned at the end of my presentation, our ad network page for those who are coming now. And when we think about a CDN commercial, which is the largest one in Latin America, we are all around the country pretty much, and all the data of ASIAM is there. If you want to reach me, there's my contact information there. So I'm available also at GatherTown. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you everyone who contributed to our debate with all your questions and comments. on our chat. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer all the questions and address them all, but it was quite interesting and very enriching also, the debate brought in terms of infrastructure in Brazil overall. So thank you all, and I'd like to hand over to Eduardo Morales back so we can carry on with our event. Thank you, Moreira. Thank you, Rogerio, Claudine. It was so interesting. I was really happy to know that you will be at our Gather Town, which we will be able to have this, which will be from 20 past noon to 1 p.m. So if you did not get your answer or your question answered, this is the moment to talk to both Rogerio and Claudine. They'll be there with us, and you can go into a room and talk to them. So carry on here. We will go to our next session.
Bom, pessoal, vamos agora para a palestra Como se conectar com a Netflix.
Okay, so let's go to the next one. How to connect with Netflix with the project Opencdn with Vinicius Esteves from Netflix. Thank you, Eduardo. Good morning to all the participants of the IX Fórum. It is always a great pleasure for me to be able to take part in the IX Fórum. Hopefully you are all taking good care of yourselves to go through this moment faster and to be able to have these events in person. For me, it's always a big satisfaction to be able to go to São Paulo and meet up with all of you, everyone, and the regional IX Fórums that was really, they were all very interesting. So thank you, Eduardo, Antonio, Bell, and everyone from the organizing team. So let me share my screen here, and I have a few slides. Just give me a second.
Ô, Bel, você pode me ajudar a compartilhar os meus slides? Eu não estou conseguindo.
Oh, could you please help me with
Com problema de permissões aqui. Não sei, não consigo. Alguém pode compartilhar? Deixa eu só entrar novamente aqui, então, um momento. Só um instante que eu vou sair e entrar rapidinho.
Pessoal, estamos aí com alguns imprevistos técnicos, tá?
We're just having some technicalities. We apologize. Vinicius will be back in a second, and we will be able to resume to have his slides up. And they are on our website. So if any case you would like to check, go ahead, check them. We have also for the next presentations you can download, and that way you can also on your own computer check on the presentation. So just bear with us, please. We'll be right back.
Gostaria de reforçar. Tá, então,
I'd like to emphasize. Okay, I believe we have the slide up by now. And I'd like to just make sure you remember that there is the certificate to sign up for your participation. If you do want it, so make sure you tap the link that is available here on our chat, and that will generate to you an email so that you can confirm that you were present here with us.
E aí, clicando nesse link, a gente...
And once you click on it, we'll be able to generate the certificate for tomorrow.
Acho que agora a gente conseguiu. Vinícius, você está conseguindo me ouvir?
Sim, tô ouvindo. Você consegue me ouvir?
Sim, está bem. Fica à vontade agora.
Valeu. Desculpa pelo atraso, pessoal. Mas vamos lá.
I apologize for the delay, everyone. So let me get started and talking about the global presence of Netflix.
A Netflix já ultrapassou a marca de 214.
And we have been over 214 million subscribers worldwide. Among them, we have an important share here in Brazil. Brazil is a market that is key to Netflix, and it's dealt with accordingly. Not only Brazil, but Latin America as a whole was one of the main reasons or the main places where Netflix expanded. And after having come to Brazil and Latin America, Netflix was able to go to other places around the world, as the map shows. I'm here to talk about the Opencdn program for Netflix. Opencdn, which is the CDN for Netflix, it's one that is very popular here in Brazil. We have been here for a few years now, and we have partnerships with ISPs to be able to deliver more efficiently traffic, to be closer to the ISPs, to be able to connect more efficiently, and to be able to deliver good user experience. And that way help ISP with delivering the content. So the Brazilian ISPs can connect to Netflix through a cache OCA server, the Opencdn appliances. I have here the two types that are available now for Brazil. The first one is the global OCA, which was one made for the ISPs that are regional, that are not big providers, and the storage ones, which is equipment of higher capacity that the regional providers, as they're growing, have been getting this type of equipment as well. So the content can be delivered through the OCA servers that are installed in the ISP networks or through peering. I have there the address for the 2906 ASN, where we have all the addresses that Netflix is part of, and some details of some interconnection policies, okay? And Netflix can be connected through peering in these locations that are listed through private peering, PNI. In São Paulo, we have S2 or NIC at João Dias. In Rio, we have J1, Fortaleza, GlobalNet, and Fortaleza Comport. It's important to say that for all these cities, Netflix is part of XBR on the public peering. So the providers that are already participants of XBR in these locations, in the city of São Paulo, Rio, Fortaleza, and Porto Alegre, are in the ATM, and they're already sharing traffic directly with Netflix. So they can review their routing settings to get the traffic straight from them, okay? Well, how is the process of engagement? And what do I mean by engagement? It's the contact of the ISPs with Netflix. When we talk about the eligibility to getting an OTA server, any person can access the page and make a request. As long as this person works in this SP and it's registered, and that there is the number of ASN, and that everything is running well with their own registration. And as an operator of ASN, as an engineer, you can fill it out yourselves. And it's open. I mean, you don't necessarily need a help. It's one that is very simple to go through. And it's really simple. Can you follow the slides there? Is it working well, everyone? There. So as I had mentioned, any ISP can have this from the form. So after this filled out form, there are some working days where one engineer of Netflix will reach you. They are the engineers of Netflix in Brazil. It could be myself. It could be Sulema Contreras, who works with me and my team, Caio Mesticoni or Flavio Amaral, who we help Brazilian providers with. If there's more than 5 gigabytes of traffic of Netflix alone for that provider, we will have them approved to get a cache server, and we go to the next step, which is the signing of the contract, where the provider needs to have their taxpayer's number active. And there are the rules, there's the confidentiality clause, and there's also rules for hardware transfer. This is digitally signed. You don't need to go to a notary. And after you sign it, the provider will make the request and personalize it. It can be with DC font, AC font, transceivers, multi-modem, with servers, BGP, among other settings. So it is very simple. All the providers, all the ones that work with ISP, that is registered, can request. And right here, I'd like to show you this graph. It's quite interesting to see the presence of the OCAs around the world. The green one is a point of a provider where it's installed a cluster, and the size of the circle is the capacity of this is an interesting graph. We present them every time, and you can tell that there has been a few changes, and we're reaching more and more regions that before we were not present at. In Brazil, we're heading to the inner of the continental area, and more with servers to the north, center west, to the countryside, to the northeast and south, inner south, and other regions in Latin America where there isn't much connectivity, and there has been more and more servers. And for us, this is really interesting to see this, where we are able to help and we see really good response.
Essas regiões mais afastadas, de Rio, São Paulo,
This is really interesting in terms of Rio, São Paulo, Mexico cities, which are regions that are more and more where we have more servers, and they have been growing in accelerated manner. So it's really great to be able to help with the infrastructure here.
How about Opencdn? This is the main topic of this presentation. Well, we are just participating at the Opencdn project in Salvador, Bahia since September 2020. And currently, the traffic peak in the past weeks in Salvador was of 80 gigabytes. In Manaus, we have just activated it August 2021, and the recent traffic peak is of around 30 gigabytes. We still require some additional activities or actions, but I would like to make a parallel to some other times that Netflix has participated and was present at some other cities with its infrastructure. In 2017, once Netflix was present in Fortaleza, there was around 10 to 15 gigas of IX.br Fortaleza. That was the total throughput. Today, that is very close to 2 terabytes in Fortaleza. It started with 10 gigabytes, then it has reached a volumes around this range. But we have perceived a growth throughout the time. Networks, they were getting connected, they were reaching those cities, data centers, they were getting prepared, providers, anytime that would travel and talk to those providers, we understood that they were being built. And today in 2021, Fortaleza is a case of success. The same happened in Rio de Janeiro during the Olympic Games. There was not enough traffic. And as time went by, that increased, and today that is quite large. And the same applies to Porto Alegre. All cities, they are increasing to Netflix in terms of traffic volume. And we suppose that that will keep growing much more. We are agreed with the NIC to install that in Brasilia, the federal capital. Servers, they are being prepared and sent to Brasilia. And we hope that by the next months, and maybe even this year, if everything goes fine, we'll be able to activate that infrastructure. And we are also paying attention to some other cities which are good candidates, and they are increasing their traffic as well. There are some other CDNs that are participating at those exchange traffic points, and we are always paying attention to that. We had installed 1 last year and 2 this year, and we bet on Opencdn. And now I'd like to give you, to leave you a message. This traffic volume, which I had listed to you, that may increase if providers, they correct some routing issues. In the Opencdn, Netflix has a new solution which made this possible, this project feasible. And in Salvador, Manaus, and Brasilia, providers, they have to sign clearly that they wanted to get the Netflix traffic via CDN. So they have to set up that community. So please, those of you who are in Salvador and Manaus, revise your ads. Rodrigo from IX is in current contact. And I'd like to take this opportunity to reinforce it. And in case you have any additional questions, just send me an email to ask me if your ads are fine. But if you're not announcing at this community, and there are several SPs that hadn't done that, that is very important because it may unlock several traffic and allow a better internet exchange point. Hardware. This is the global server. The server will be updated in the near future. We are always revising hardware with more capacity, more efficiency. That was developed to serve regional SPs. There was a huge demand, especially in Brazil. This is a hardware that we send to many Brazilian providers. And this is the storage server, is a server with really high capacity, and that has been developed for a POP. In the past, just those large carriers and those large SPs would get this sort of storage, but that now has been widely spread also to those smaller SPs. How about Netflix streaming, so you can better understand how important routing is? In orange, you see the Netflix platform that runs in the WS. In the US, this is a coordinated arrangement that is coordinated in the AWS, where all the authentication, OCA monitoring, among some other services. On the left of your screen, in blue, you see data plane. Data plane is the Netflix CDN, the cache connectors installed at Netflix POPs and also within the ISP's POPs. And on the right, you see the Netflix screen, which represents users. Once users, they press play, the app that you have at your smartphone, it will connect to the AWS, which will send an IP address, and AWS will send back to the user the best server to perform the streaming connection. Streaming will start from data plane in direction to the client, and OCAs also connect to the East Coast to the United States to address the hardware status. How about end user smart TV app will be able to select what is the best cache server to send the content? Well, BGP is responsible for that selection. End users IP available at all BGP sessions at providers, OCAs, and IX. If we have a more specific IP, that is the OCI that we will consider to be the optimal one to work as a server. If we have a prefix AS path, and then we have the geolocation, if we have a even number, we have also to revise the CDN, how they are performing their ads, as a geolocation in our region is not yet the best choice. The best way to do it is by announcing your prefixes or to set up the BGP to local server or to your IX connections or maybe international traffic connections as your last option. And we have to honor our MEDs. But for PNI's connections, we should add 50 for peering, private peering, and for public IX peering, we should add 100 to be able to localize more servers. And one last home take message, which is all necessary documents to allow such a relationship to ASNs. In case the providers, they would like to add any IPs prefixes to other ASNs, Let's say that a provider A has installed OCA and provider B may not have one. Let's say that provider A would like to announce the prefixes of provider B to its own OCA. They should have all this relationship documented somehow. That can be done by creating a ASSAT Internet Route Registry, IRR. You may search for the IRR document public list, which are widely used, including they are supported by NIC, or maybe you may have that Open Connected active by RPKI. If you register your prefixes, you may understand if that source is still valid or not. And since the beginning of last year, Netflix CDN applies active RPKI filters for IXPs as well as for OCIs. And we also filter those invalid ISPs. If that is a registered prefix, but it does not fit, we just drop that out. If you have a route registry and by any mistake, maybe while typing that down, and your prefixes might be announced in Europe with a higher level of preference, if you register it, we are going to drop that wrong route that was received in Europe or somewhere else, and your IXP traffic will still be local. That happens quite frequent, and we see some unexpected traffic detours due to some typing errors or some other type of BGP route errors. Providers with OCIs who are not providing all the documentations, we are requiring them to do it. That is an official list by the Netflix Open Connect CDN. So stay tuned, comply with best practices to allow a consistent network use. Well, that's it for now. Here you find my contact information. Feel free to send me your questions, your concerns, suggestions, anything. Now I hand over to you, Eduardo. Thank you. Thank you, Vinicius. We have a couple of questions. We are running a little bit behind our schedule. We have a question from Gessian and Lucas. Are there any additional costs for providers that access that to host Netflix? And here I'm talking about infrastructure costs. And for those remote regions, required traffic should be 5G, or can that be a bit more flexible? Netflix ISP's model is based on partnership. We offer the cash modality to the ISPs, and the ISP agrees to keep the server connected in case they agree on replacing transmitters or optical fibers, and to keep a connectivity between servers to the internet. Global servers, they need something around 400 megabits to be able to update during the evening, to avoid using the provider backbone in the rush hours. That is updated in Brazil via São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Porto Alegre, or Fortaleza, those 4 main hubs. These are the main requirements. As to traffic volume, not only to Brazil, but to the whole Latin America and to the United States, the minimum traffic volume is 5 gigabytes per second. If you are far away, in case you have any additional contest, just send me an email. Let me know what the real situation is, and we'll be able to see that in details. Those of you who are at those more remote areas, don't hesitate to contact me. In addition to latency, to content access, what are the advantages and disadvantages to have a local crash Netflix or to have APE or IX PBR connections? What are the pros and cons of each one of those modalities? Well, Andrea, the cache server is a nirvana of our network, sort of speaking. If you have a cache placed at your POP, you'll be connected to fewer failure points of traffic that will mitigate a number of unnecessary external risks, such as instability in your traffic provider, in addition to allow some band savings. A global model will download, but that may vary according to your hardware or to the consumption pattern. There are several variables, but apparently 80% of the Netflix content may be downloaded just by one server. And once a cluster grows, the traffic becomes more local. There are several examples where 99% of the whole Netflix traffic may be stored at one ASP POP, and by increasing the cluster, we are able to increase our storage capacity. So I see all of these as advantages to our ASP providers to count on cache servers. Another question, is it required to add 427, 400 to bilateral exchanges or just to the Opencdn? No, just to Opencdn. Opencdn runs on a different platform, different from the traditional one we find at the main capitals. And that additional platform requires this specific setup. If you are in São Paulo or in Fortaleza, and if you are in the ADM, you are already exchanging traffic with us without any additional setup. But if you are in the IX.br in Rio de Janeiro and it requires your traffic to come from Rio de Janeiro and that is not happening, just please then revise your setup to see if your registry is conducted with the best BGP metrics for this connection. Well, Vinicius, thank you so much for your participation. We got so many questions. We didn't have a chance to answer all of that. I'd like to invite you to participate at our networking session, so people will be able to, ask you some more questions. We are running a little bit late, so instead of having 20 minutes coffee break, let's just have 10 minutes. So please be back in 10 minutes. And now let's run the video.
Bom, pessoal, voltando aí do intervalo, espero que tenha dado tempo para todo mundo tomar um café, ir no banheiro. A gente agora tem mais palestras.
Okay, thank you everyone for being back. We'll have a few more sessions before lunchtime. And just to remind you that if you want to get the certificate of IX Fórum 15, you need to sign up, and we'll have the link right here on the chat for you. And pay attention to your email up to 2 p.m. because you need to confirm that you were watching our sessions. So carrying on here, I'd like to invite our next session up.
Já tá on. Ok, posso começar? Não.
Bom, pessoal, então agora a gente vai ter a apresentação.
Okay, now we will have the presentation, Evolution of Network Automation of Cowboy-style scripts of highly synced network. Sony, Diogo, please take the floor. Thank you, Eduardo. It's a great pleasure to be here after so many years and talking to people from Brazil here. I'm Diogo Montanier, and I work at Sony Interactive Entertainment. And we will be talking today about automation. Let me share my slides.
Beleza. Então, a ideia que eu vou apresentar hoje aqui é uma
So here we're going to talk about network automation evolution and how we came from cowboy style scripts to highly orchestrated networks. So what I have for you is an agenda where we're going to look into the automation journey, then we'll get into the integration of systems and system automation, and we will compare provisioning automation with automation of operational tasks. I mean, how people are really working on it, I mean, and what we can do. And really see what are the next steps for you. This is what we'll be doing. So, this is a Australian log presentation I had where I showed this diagram talking about the automation journey. At the time, it was on telemetry, where I talked about everybody has really been on telemetry and working on it fine. So thinking about it. So to be able to use AI, machine learning for network automation. So reality is a bit different. I mean, where you get these waves, the fact that you were able to surf the automation wave, it doesn't mean that you'll no longer surf it. You'll keep doing, and you'll get better and better. And that way, that happens also with telemetry and machine learning. And we, as companies, organizations, and the industry, we have taken steps forward and are quite advanced when it comes to automation and telemetry. We have been working well. I mean, there's still a lot to go. And with machine learning, we're still just at the hype of the story.
realidade da jornada de automação é pouco mais diferente.
And the reality of the journey is a bit more different. So we start as a keyboard hero, which is the network engineer that knows all the protocols at the tip of the tongue, or I should say at the tip of our fingers, and type fast. That's a guy that knows it all, knows everything of how to fix problems on the network. And then this person realizes that there's not enough hands and starts to create the cowboy script, as I call them. And if you want a more formal one, would be the ad hoc script. Cowboy is a neater term, I would say. And every time this takes place in the organizations, this is something that is seen by managers and those on oversight role as a miracle, or almost like the unicorn in automation. And then what happens? As we were able to do script, we start having a script for each thing, collecting something from the network for settings, for this and for that. And then it becomes quite a, I mean, you need to coordinate all that. And that's when you have the Ansible. Well, we become the Ansible ninja. And that's when you start to connect the scripts in a way that is random. And then you start a framework in the automation. And then you reach the inflection point. That's for me where you start to really become a grown-up when it comes to automation. You start to realize that Cowboy script and Ansible as the Cowboy script is not sustainable. And then you start also having other things coming up, which is northbound systems, and you need to start interacting with other things. And then you start checking APIs. And when you start looking at APIs, you realize there are other problems. You realize, I mean, before you created the script, you wanted the way you wanted, and everybody had to use what you had created. With the APIs, each system will have their own system of API interface and protocol, and that's when you realize that it is so complicated. I mean, to have many northbound systems with different APIs and different models. I mean, to make all of these changes, and then when you look into the standard bodies. So it's really, there's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 that you can choose from, and you realize that you can't just choose one or another. I mean, although there are some overlaps, I mean, there are different propositions. So depending on what it is, you'll need to have more than one. And then there are the vendors with the suggestions they have to help you out. And each vendor will be an advocate of the standard bodies and APIs they support. What happens is that you end up doing a good interaction there. And on the other side, which I call the event horizon, which is I mean, the unicorn and all this great automation that everybody talks about and that we have never seen before, it's really hard to know how to get there, you know? So at the end, you have a spaghetti of automation. So when you have all this point of not digesting well the spaghetti, so you start seeing things in a way, and I'll use the term in English because I don't know how you should say it in Portuguese, holistic, to really see it from 450 feet up. So you start to realize or question yourself of the APIs, I mean, of how this is going to be used in terms of support. So then you'll realize, as you're not able to have one single, I mean, can I use an API for translation? And the API gateway has other features as Trotten and role-based access control and many other things. But one of the features is to translate APIs. And then you start checking all the data models. You have OpenConfig, TFMF, or I create my own models. That's what it means. I mean, to really will it accept, I mean, to do this in a way that I wouldn't need to customize the systems that are northbound for integration. And the other thing is buy versus build. And many times has to do with the price of the system. I mean, to use open source, and it's for free. I mean, it's free, but it's not that free because you need to observe maintenance, evolution, skill set that you need. Personally, I mean, I love build. It makes me feel the freedom of building whatever you have. But if you're not disciplined enough, and here I should emphasize as network engineers, for the most case, we are not software engineers. And the biggest mistake I realize is, I mean, network engineers wanted to be software engineers, and you end up creating your own problems. I mean, the answer to all these 4 questions is really depends. I mean, on many factors, and I'll try to answer a few here and to put them into perspective so you can understand how to make a decision based on these 4 questions. We talked a lot about provisioning, integration. The reality is that we set aside the whole operations team. And why? Well, this diagram here is the Devops Survey. For those who don't know, it's a survey that was made by network engineers to network engineers. So there are people that are in vendors, other in companies. So there is a pool of people that worked and answered this survey. So it's quite heterogeneous, I would say. And it's great because it gives you a good feel and realistic idea of what is out there, because usually on a marketing analysis of what you have, what you usually have a use case behind it all. This graph is all very clear, and the whole provisioning and config, we believe is well done. We solved the problem, as most of the organizations have this problem already solved. But when you look into the bottom part that is not inside the red square, it's all about the operational automation, and there's much still to be done. And obviously, and right in there, that's where you have a greater complexity of automation. So the whole story here is that we were able to fix the long-hanging fruit, the low-hanging fruit of automation, and we need to reach operation. And for that reason, I should bring the question back to all of us as the network industry. What do we need to do to level up the automation game, to get to the level that other industries have already reached? So here I have other 3 industries to compare with. I could have added more, but I chose 3 because they're industries that are very easy for all of us as network engineers to realize. Web industry, if you've been for a few years as me in the market, you see like this DocCF and how hard it was to config a spam system and DNS and the whole do. And now with just a half dozen tapping, you're able to get your website up and running, get your email done, and get the whole DNS ready. And you don't even need to really have the and go and edit .com config. So that means we don't have this type of automation. We have not reached network automation where you have connectors that can easily interconnect with each other and automate things. The same is true for the car industry. The car industry has not gotten to self-driving car fully. They're close to it, but there are a set of points that they have already fixed. And that's another point, that we have to stop thinking of just being purists and not think about the whole process, but smaller problems. Cars have cruise control, they have the anti-collision system. So this whole electronic apparatus that helps you drive easily. The aviation industry has fly-by-wire, where there are all these automations that really simplify the pilot's work. And that's what we need to bring to the network industry, especially when it comes to automation. We need to get things that can make it simple when it comes to automation. And that was the initial purpose of SDN, which I call the overhyped SD world. Everything becomes software defined. In my view, I think SDN is getting to where it had promised to reach back in 2014. Or even before that. So I believe we rushed towards the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, while we had not defined the major blocks for the automation. There's another point also where there was a lot of marketing around SDN. Software-defined network, software-defined data center, software-defined access, software-defined whatever sounds cool. So people needed to have the software-defined. AI, machine learning is really heading the same way. Everything you have ML AI, but when you start really unpacking ML AI, you realize that there isn't much there in our field. In other ones, there have been great advances, but in ours, it's still just a niche and it's quite small, with good solutions in some areas when it comes to alarms and reducing alarm noise and suggestions of actions to be taken when it comes to alarms. In any case, we're still really far from getting to ML AI telling us what would be the best configuration for the network to optimize traffic. We are quite far from that. So I would like to say that I want to leave you with a positive message. SDN has come a long way and has finally reached the place where we wanted it to be from back then when the whole thing started. And why? Why were you able to get there with SDN? Because people stopped trying to fix all problems at once and try to really focus on niches. And that's what I said in the past slide. Let's break down problems to have them smaller, and that will be easier to solve. So now you can easily see in the market, and here I'm talking about commercial solutions, but they're open source as well, many controller-driven solutions for specific problem spaces, for band space, for latency. So there are many controllers available for automatizing data centers. So the problem is that now is a bit different, is how to manage all these different controllers. And still, we do not have, although there's an RFC, I don't know if it's an RFC, there's a standard of ITF, if I'm not mistaken, which is for hierarchical controller, where there isn't much development in this area. And when we look into this, there is always, we always need to look into those who did it and worked out and learn from the lessons. That's very important. And in this case, I'm talking about web scalers. These guys, they have a very advanced automation. And one typical mistake I see, and I see that mainly every week when I talk to people about automation, before with clients when I worked with vendors or said, we're not web scalers, we will never be one. And in my opinion, this is a big mistake.
It's very likely that you will not be a web scaler, and that will not prevent you from applying the same approach to solve automation issues. To do something faster on your keyboard won't solve issues. Why don't you replicate prior examples and, try to manage cattle instead of pets? And there are 3 messages that are very clear as how web scalers may solve your problems. First, walk away from the keyboard. Let's no longer see the web as a BGP keyboard. It's high time that we see the network from a bigger perspective. You also have to understand how BGP works. If you have to adjust automation due to any reason, you will need to know how to manipulate the BGP buttons, but not necessarily pressing all the BGP buttons. Second, we should see routers as a set of routers and not see them individually. And in my opinion, the third item is the most important of all, which is architect for automation. That may lead to a number of questions. What do you mean by that? Well, there are certain things that you can do on your network architecture, which will simplify the way as you implement automation. For instance, if you implement a router which may be scalable vertically and there is any failure leading to outage, there is nothing much to be automated. There is no other alternative. But if you break that router, and you may detour your traffic to one of those 4 routers, you divide your problem in 24 blocks radio, reduced blocks radio. This is just one example of what can be done in the architecture. There are different sorts of automations. The code in the messages. When I said that you should walk away from the keyboard, what's that specifically? Well, we should see the network from a more abstract approach. We don't need to know exactly what are the buttons to be pressed in the BGP to follow the pathway. Instead of saying to the network automation that you should configure the BGP under those parameters, you are going to say to focus on configure route reflector peering. If one day I needed to adjust it, because you may have used the 2 router reflectors, and now you have to change or to make any sort of adjustments. Why should we manage routers as part of a group and not individually? Well, design the automation for scale. Design the automation for horizontal scale. Try to avoid any vertical scale. If you get a too big router and if you overload it, if there is any sort of fail, that fail will be too large. But if you break that router into smaller ones, if one of those fail, you are going to have a fail, but that will not be so important as before. The impact will be much lower. It's not just how to automate the network, but how you develop it. If you have to push up your automation to 100 or 200 routers, which is totally different than if you were dealing with just one of those routers. So consider horizontal scale since the very beginning. Also, design your automation system to be easily replaced. You cannot get everything right since the very beginning. There are those that will run smoothly, others that will not, and problems will just pop up later on. And if you project your automation to be replaced, you'll be able to exchange that component to another better one or to make any necessary adjustments. If you have a tightly coupled approach, it will be much more difficult to solve problems. Be careful automating human-like workflows. Just by setting up or carrying out things in a certain way, that does not necessarily mean that is the best way to automate a certain process. If you are if the automation of a problem, you are going to end up having a scalable automation problem. Automation may simplify things, but if you automate something wrong, you are going to replicate the problem. Keep the blast radius small. And keep in mind that things will fail if you design and if you project automation with a small blast radius.
você vai ter sistema muito mais robusto.
You will have a much more robust system for both automation and network. And last but not least important, architecture for automation. Network architecture and good automation go hand in hand. If you have a focus architecture for automation, it's going to be much easier to completely automate your network. Apply KISS principle, keep it stupid simple.
Outra forma que eu geralmente falo isso é não tente do not over engineering.
Or do not over engineering. Try to keep it simple. Loose coupling.
Para facilitar aquele substituição de componentes que eu estava quanto mais
facilitate the replacement. If you have a loosen components integration, the easier it will be to replace them in case of trouble. Horizontal scale, fair enough. Avoid large routers, break that down in smaller parts, and that can be applied to softwares during automations. And try to understand your failure domains. If I have any flaws in my automation, what sort of impact will that cause? Well, I will no longer configure my network. That will lead to revenue loss, leading to operating issues. So you have to understand your failure domains. If a group of routers fail, if a place of my network fails, if my automation systems is no longer working, what is my disaster recovery plan?
E sempre que você está lidando com automação, você tem que ter o que eu chamo das redes de segurança. Seria safety net, né? Que nem aquelas redes que a gente bota na nossa janela de apartamento.
And then the safety net. If anyone tries to jump from the window, the network will keep it.
Ou não esperada, você
if the network does not behave accordingly, you have some preventive mechanisms. There are different ways.
Alguns exemplos, fail safe, o botão vermelho de
You have the fail safe
quebrar o vidro do alarme.
To break the alarm window.
Você pode implementar isso. Uma delas
There are several techniques to implement it, such as the shutdown for all virtual machines.
Então, como é que eu já estou terminando aqui, já estou nos últimos 2 slides. Como é que
I have 2 more slides to close. How we get to the other side?
Conseguiu implementar alto nível de automação, né?
How can we reach the other high level of automation?
Tecnológico, como a maioria do pessoal tem ferramentas e frameworks.
There are tools and open source tools and commercially open tools that there are several options, and you may choose whatever you feel like. That is not a technical issue indeed. Usually that is a problem between strategy and tactics.
Que se tornaram pessoas que têm conhecimento de automação e por si só.
Those people that have knowledge and understanding in network automation, usually we attack problems in a more tactical way, and we put aside the strategic share of it. Strategy is important because it encompasses business, technical issues. If you bring all of that together, you have a broader picture. And this is exactly what you have to do to be there. If you just, try to solve problems and not to improve your performance, you won't get anywhere.
o pessoal do negócio, o pessoal técnico.
Those that work with the management, business and technical part, you have all to be aligned with the same goals. And that has to do with the environment and with the culture of the company. The environment has to be as positive and healthy as possible to foster solutions implementation. It cannot be that type of environment that we called as blame culture, to find someone to blame. Let's try to work on a safe and healthy environment.
Change management.
Embrace changes, embrace failures, and celebrate success. If you get annoyed every time that you are after a maintenance approval, this is the first step to be solved. Maintenance, windows, or network changes, they should be done routinely. That should be done with no further problems. There are a number of things that can be done, which are part of our culture. Such as you may change the maintenance line to those aspects that are of lower risks and that can be managed. Embrace failures. We try to do our best to avoid problems, to avoid failures, but in case we face any, we should avoid blaming others and face the problem to avoid the problems, but there was another situation that has caused the problem.
Onde é que isso escapou da nossa estratégia, do nosso plano? Como é que a gente vai prevenir isso no futuro? Todas essas coisas.
How can we prevent failures in the future and celebrate if things are successful?
A gente está sempre correndo atrás do caminhão, né? Sempre tem muita coisa para fazer, mas
we are usually in such a hurry, and sometimes we end up forgetting to celebrate our successful achievements.
Para onde a gente vai? Ou como é que você traça o caminho para chegar lá do outro lado do Event Horizon?
Where to go from here to reach the other side of the event horizon? You have to know where you are and what your goals will be in your timeline. You also have to list your goals.
Eu chamo a atenção. Os seus objetivos técnicos alinhados com os objetivos estratégicos.
And your technical and strategic goals, they all have to be aligned to your company's goals. If you are aligned to the organization strategy and to your company's business, you'll be able to get everyone's support. And a much easier align management. Create a strategy, develop a plan, execute, monitor, and adapt it.
Em gerenciamento de projeto, isso é conhecido como PDCA. Né?
This is known as PDCA.
Modifica. Como indústria, na minha opinião, onde é que a gente precisa?
As an industry, we need to think automation first.
Tem mais fala, mais marketing do que execução, na minha opinião.
There is much more saying than doing
Nesse aspecto.
from a industry perspective. Anyway, we are doing much better than 5 years ago, but we still have much more to do. Too much distraction in our market. We need to make automation more seamless.
Da indústria da web, né? A gente tem que
We have to stop setting up the BGP button or other integrations that should be simpler to allow more people to deploy them. We have to remove noise, or at least to filter what is reality and what is noise. And we have to make automation sustainable. Otherwise, we won't be working towards an effective strategy. Thank you.
Diogo, muito obrigado aí pela sua
Thank you, Diogo, for your presentation. Unfortunately, we do not have more time for questions because our time is up, but you are invited to participate at our networking platform where you'll be able to answer some of your questions. But as you used most of your time, we do not have more time for questions. So at 12:20, you are invited to participate at the networking session, okay?
Então, muito obrigado pela sua apresentação.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll carry on with this IX Fórum 15 for our next session.
Então, pessoal, voltamos agora com a previsão.
Okay, we're back now with the prediction of the impact of interruptions of Internet Exchange Point using Anycast. Leandro, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me well. Well, I will be presenting to you this co-joint work with the University of Twente here of US Game and Net Labs. And the whole idea here is, I would say, the initial idea is pretty much simple, because we need to have a forecast to measure the impact of the drop of some infrastructure and how that can impact nationally. So an idea is that if we lose a critical infrastructure, the origin of all of that is like cyber resilience of system and networks, where there's a risk assessment made to try to understand what happens if there's a loss of 30 kilometers in a region in the US where there are many cloud service, also many internet exchange point and government service. So since there's a cyber economy that year over year, we realize that is getting more into banking through internet. I mean, in terms of all online. So what happens that we lose it. And this starts to become a critical point. So how can we really reduce the impact of the loss of some of these elements? Well, so one of the points that have been suggested here in this book or in this study is that it would be quite complicated to have a simulation of a drop in this region of Ashburn in the US, because usually when we're talking about an energy grid where you have highway, where you have the map, but the internet map is something that's a bit more complicated, where we realize that there hasn't really been a solution to it. So the whole idea is to understand what we have in terms of network traffic for the providers if we lose a key part like internet exchange, will the local be able to absorb the traffic that before was going into this internet exchange point where that part will not be absorbed? So the whole idea is to understand how critical the problem is. So the first point is that if the internet exchange points are critical. So if we analyze like Germany, they say yes. The KICS in Frankfurt is a critical infrastructure for the country. If we look into other countries, most do not have any type of definition on that. And in a few, they're not considered critical infrastructure, though the whole idea is to try to understand better the infrastructure, to know what happens if we lose one of these elements.
Não for uma perda por alguns minutos, como normalmente.
And if that loss is not for a few minutes, as usually we have with internet exchange points, but a bit longer for days, weeks, or even months, depending on the type of flaw that is present. And obviously, to define the impact of everyone that is directly or indirectly connected to an internet exchange point that uses this infrastructure one way or another. So what were we able to do? We developed a method, and the whole idea is to be able to measure the impact of the drop of a network. So we made a case study of internet exchange point, but that's true for any network. If you have an Amazon and you want to replicate, all this infrastructure to really make it suitable to what there is when there is a loss of connection with internet exchange point or peering, of knowing how much it is and will be redirected and where to. Okay. Who is this method useful to? Mainly for policymakers, where they can understand which way they should direct their investments on infrastructure in the country, and if it's important to regulate or not, and for network administrators, especially the larger ones, so they're able to have a better capacity planning of the network. Oh, you lost access to this in Sao Paulo, to the internet exchange point. So where do you go? It will take me to the US. So I need to have more capacity for the US, for instance. And how did we work that out? Well, we made an analysis of many tools that could be used so that we could go through the measures. So one is the most common, to use some type of net flow, hyperflow, or any of the sort. So this would be the best solution, because we would have some information about any type of traffic on the network. If we were going to talk about some network exchange, what you have with each one, and if we would turn off that internet exchange point where we would have that traffic go to, but that's not a feasible solution, because there are many legislation on privacy in countries where that cannot be applied. It would be impossible to have that applied all around the world. And other ones would be the trace routes. So an infrastructure that there is, which is really used in the US, which is able to and have been used in other events for measuring, which will be the one that is called RIPE Atlas, which allows us from 12,000 different ASNs to be able to know which way the traffic is heading before the incident and after the incident, or even during it. But the main point is that the footprint of RIPE Atlas is in Europe and some in the US, but it's not really with a great footprint around the world. So usually we have 12,000 ASNs when we have 72 actives as we speak. And other work that was made, it was on BGP communities, where it was asked for internet exchange point to mark the communities to know if a certain route was seen by any reflector as route Vs, and once it would get disconnected, if you no longer see this community, that means I knew there was a drop right there where it's taken to. But there was a problem also, which is that would allow us to do an analysis of facts that had already been present. And for network exchange, it's something that wasn't applicable necessarily to other infrastructures as a private network or cloud. So we chose to try to apply what we call a scanner anycast, where we have a network where we distribute it in many places, and we started to have a measuring over it, and we were able to reach 60,000 ASCs and 6.5 million networks better than any other solution. And what was interesting is that we were able to have a scanner anycast installed anywhere. I mean, it's low cost, so it's a solution that is feasible with a government structure. And if it were to be replicated in a way to really measure in a critical point where we have some government infrastructure to know what's going to be up if this infrastructure is lost in terms of internet traffic or network traffic, for that matter. And how does that work? So what would you say? This one is test bed, and the other one is a project that has the description, this and other ones. So what's the whole idea here? Basically, we got 3 different methods, one to measure footprint, and the other one to measure the comparison between one or another, to see if there is a common use among them and how traffic is distributed. When you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, asset 6, 1, 4, and then we were able to do it then. And to really repeat that, and this type of information, it will tell you pretty much how this will work. Basically, we have here a pinger that will ping right around here, this 6 million networks. It can be anywhere in the internet. It can vary, or it can be right on Internet Exchange itself. And from there on, we can ping using this Anycast address for someone somewhere online, which is a list that we have with one IP address. And then we see where the response will go to, if it will be for one internet exchange point or a transit provider, to be able to control measure. We change the preferences. So here we have for transit provider, which would be our node where anything would head to, where you don't have an internet exchange. And here the one we're analyzing. So we would call it a more specific prefix, or someone less specific. And also, what is the reach of internet exchange? Who is really seeing it? Because more specific, and will direct the traffic that way. So we can see 10 that we spotted as the major ones, except for Porto Alegre, which is the smallest. But all the other ones are as the 10 to 12 major ones, Australia, as well as small. And that's way we selected based on which the main submarine fibers reach. That's why you have this map, and obviously where we have the infrastructure. Well, some of the results we were able to reach. Well, first of all, analyzing how much of our solution we're able to cover online. So we realized that once we analyzed the 6.5 million networks, we had a response close to 5 million networks that were responding to us. This is a constant measure. This was done through 120 days. We're still ongoing. with the measuring. And also, I mean, part of the internet here is visible. And what do I mean by that? It means that part of the internet that we were able to actually map out, where we actually got responses to the IPs that we tested for the prefixes we had tested. Each of these ports are specific bar 24. And we got also response, which is the ones that came from the internet exchange points, the IXPs, and we were able to map them. And we got close to 1,800/24 that were being sent to the IXPs. When we analyze them, it's hard to draw any conclusion because of the volume of information. So you have 6 million networks, but it doesn't really represent the internet. We have something about 20 to 25% of that. If we put that into the autonomous number system, we have a greater footprint. So we were able to reach 50,000, or actually 60,000, which are the ASS that answer to our queries. And here we have a total of about 60 to 70,000 ASs that were active online. So we were able to reach about 90% of that. And we were able to see that, which is an interesting fact to be mentioned, that if we do consider that we only connected 10 out of these internet exchange points, we see that they are the major ones, that's fine, but we were able to have a footprint of 40,000. So those who are connected to these 10 would be able to reach half of the global internet without having to depend on their providers, access providers, which is quite interesting. So how much of the internet each IXP reach? Well, we have about 56% of all of them. If I connect, and something else that we noticed is that some of these internet exchange points have different characteristics, and we were able to do something where it was look at the route table of internet exchange. That's a source of information, and this is one that has to do with the traffic that I'm sending to someplace. So that would be the outbound of internet exchange points. And with these techniques, we're able also to measure the inbound, because I get the responses from a point of view of someone who is outside the internet somewhere. And if they see or not, or knows or not how to get to this internet exchange point, if it's the only way available. And then we see, okay, if we look in Amsterdam, we realize that the inbound traffic is similar to outbound. So I see here my route table, and this is what I'll get for traffic. But when we look at other internet exchanges, as Sao Paulo or Frankfurt, this number does change. And what does that mean? That means that few participants of internet exchange points are simply mute, so they can't really hear the prefix that is being sent by internet exchange point, and consequently they choose to have the traffic sent some other way. And that's the part we're still trying to develop to understand how this asymmetric point is being carried out. That is undergoing, but the first figures show that if I connect in Frankfurt, that's fine. I am able to reach 66% of all the ASs online, which is quite high. However, I will only have inbound traffic of 46%. And in Sao Paulo, we have 31% of all the ASs online with the inbound of 25%. What's the good about this? In terms of figures, it means that if I connect to Sao Paulo and I'm a CDN, that's great. I'm able to deliver traffic for this, which will be 31%, which is the outbound. But if I am a access provider, I'll just get 25% of this. So this is the whole symmetric aspect that should really go through an additional study. Well, this, in terms of IXPs, they ignore what we get there. And the motivation is still one that we are not aware of. Some other point that we studied, considering any national infrastructure or considering a global company that has a connection with many ASs, what about if I lose some connection for one of these with many internet exchange points? What happens if I just lose to one of them? One of the options, like, alrighty, I mean, if I have two internet exchange points, I expect that internet exchange point A and B will have one as the backup of the other. So we pretty much study to understand to what extent that comes out as true. So if we do compare with what we have here in orange, I know it seems pink, but in any case, internet exchange in Amsterdam and the Frankfurt one, the kicks, they're close geographically. They're quite close, and you see there's a considerable difference here from, I mean, we already knew there was that among clients, so now we're being able to measure traffic, so we're able to see this overlap, which is about 50% among all of them, AMS, DKICs, and links. So this means that if I connect in any of the three, I will get 50% of the same traffic. That means if you're looking into variability of content, these three have 50% of the same content. And then you have the greater overlaps where you can have 59 plus 3, 62% when you say about AM6 and links. So if we analyze other ones here that are at a right distance, São Paulo, Seattle, and Australia, you can see that the overlap do separate. And if you're looking into a redundancy, I need to connect to that to those that have a greater overlap. And in this case here, if I want redundancy in Europe, I'm going to do that connecting with the two internet exchange, Amsterdam and DKICs.
So that would be one of the possibilities. Now, at what extent those IXPs are meaningful to those countries where they are installed? Well, we have to understand the source of those ISs and the volume of traffic, considering that they are connected everywhere. So I would imagine the NIC.br AS, if that would be connected to all IXPs. The gray line that represents our exchange power, the most that that internet exchange may reach. AMS, IX may reach 18,000. However, Amsterdam Internet Exchange has a greater reach than Frankfurt, but most of those that have both connections, they prefer to deliver at Frankfurt. So if you connect at both, you might get more traffic from Frankfurt than from Amsterdam. The traffic you see in blue is the domestic traffic in Europe, RIP, RIP. So there is a much greater chance to be delivered in Amsterdam and not in Frankfurt, less in London or France. How about IX.br São Paulo? Well, the Latin America IX is delivered mainly in São Paulo. There is that regionality bias, yet those ASs from a certain region, they prefer to render into a closer IXP, I should say. Well, but the goal is to be able to forecast failures. What to do in case of one of those internet exchange points fail. Here we lose one of those IXPs. How to measure them to be able to make probabilities. A fail in Amsterdam, I have a DEC IX sharing amounting 40 to 50%, and which ASs are connected at both parts. On a prior event of failure in 2015 that took place in Amsterdam, the AKIX staff expected that part of Amsterdam traffic would be delivered to Frankfurt, but that's not quite the case. Usually, once there is internet exchange failure, there is a trend for others to be uploaded. But in this real case, the Frankfurt internet exchange failed simultaneously because of a loop in the Amsterdam region. And we noticed that there were several asymmetric ASs. They would deliver to Frankfurt and then get that just in Amsterdam. That was a short failure, impossible to be corrected, affecting both sites. We have no more data to be able to compare. In that case, we would require flows to go into a deeper validation. For fails like that, there is no information about individual ASNs. We are able to know how each one of those will behave in case of fail of those internet exchange, if they are going to deliver that to a provider or what. And during the DEC IX fails back in 2018, we have noticed an overload registry in the German ISPs. Germany ISPs. Our forecast was just based or mapped based on the open peering base, but we estimated that there was an overload, I should say, of 23% for all internet providers. And according to our tests, all those exchange traffics in Frankfurt, they would migrate to Amsterdam, and in case of a fail in Amsterdam, they would migrate to links and not to Frankfurt due to traffic asymmetry. And as an outcome, after compiling all this information, we have this map. If there is any fail in Seattle, 80% of the whole traffic will be drained to access providers that will cope with all Seattle's traffic. If that takes place in São Paulo, around 27 to 30% of all this will take place, and you'll be able to get more information at our articles. But if there is any drop in São Paulo, we are going to have that discharged to 6. We had a case of instability in São Paulo, and they told us that the traffic was being exchanged with the United States. While monitoring, this is a 20 days monitoring where we have registered a number of fails. One of them was a submarine cable problem. Another one was a routing policy change on our internet provider. All these changes may be seen in our measurement behaviors.
Até foi o Rogério Mariano que nos ajudou a localizar esse problema aí, com os contatos que ele tem do pessoal de fibra submarina.
Rogério Mariano helped us to identify these problems in the sub-cables. And part of the traffic that was being driven to Seattle has increased, and the cable was very close to Europe, the submarine cable. And the links traffic, part of that traffic was sent directly to the United States. Case number 2, there was a fail in the Frankfurt access provider entry, where we lost part of the Frankfurt connection, and the whole traffic has migrated to Amsterdam. And later on, there is a traffic return, a partial return, and here the hurricane electric route and policy change. And we believe that everything else is an event or problems that replicates the same very event, which was a submarine cable problem, which usually takes 20 days to be able to recover all services. First measurement was in September, and then we kept measuring till March, and after that, quite stable levels. There is a stability, and this is a behavioral baseline. But in case of fails, we change the baseline, and we are able to forecast what to expect in each one of the fails. And to conclude, we managed to design a new approach for fails quantification. We applied this methodology in IXPs with a very low cost. That has been compared to real cases as much as possible, and we believe that that can be useful to map critical infrastructures, especially to those governmental agencies that host several platforms such as critical systems such as hospital, police stations, and so on the cloud. And of course, those operators that they require a capacity planning. That's it for now. If you still require any further information, you may search for the website URL to search for more articles information. Thank you, Bertoldo. Very interesting presentations, but we no longer have time for questions. For those of you that would like to reach Bertoldo, please do it. And Bertoldo, you are also invited to participate at our networking at Gather. Please participate. Okay, I'll be there. Well, what's our next activity?
Bom, seguindo aqui as apresentações do IX Fórum 15, agora eu gostaria de chamar o Opencdn.
And to resume, I would like to invite Guilherme Ledvocat, representing Opencdn Audit.
Boa tarde a todos.
Thank you, Eduardo, and good afternoon to everyone.
Bom, meu nome é Guilherme Ledvocat.
I am a analyst operator, and I'm here to talk about our RNP project. This is the Brazilian academic research network. We have 27 POPs, 1,500 clients, a high capacity backbone. Our last miles are carried out throughout metropolitan networks and carriers. We have several manufacturers as part of our network, and also a number of devices to be managed. This is a distributed type of management. Our devices, they are quite different in terms of level of technology. There are some of those models that do not count on technology support for automation, such as NetConf, RESTconf, and Young, and default config. Sometimes they lack on security. And to be able to solve all those gaps, we understood that further automation would be required, and DevOps can help us with those activities. We have to automate that checking on a scalable and flexible way by supporting multiple manufacturers, and as a consequence to that, improving our security, applying best config practices. An overview about the evolution of the project. In 2019, we started really small. In the beginning, we didn't have no automation or whatsoever. We just had safe config lines, and that was done manually with a spreadsheet consolidation, which would not be scalable to the network. So automation of the process would be mandatory.
Eu vou mostrar mais à frente como esse MVP aconteceu. Mas em 2020,
in 2020, after running the MVP at some POPs, identifying some possible improvements, new functionalities, new features, we underwent that program to NIC. And in 2021, we concluded the development cycle and we released the version 1.0. Such a development was conducted in the RNP operational agency, supported by KAIs and POPs. Developers, myself and Thiago Siqueira. Here is the system architecture. Where we use the Django framework, that is a Python one. We have a database which consumes. That is a modular architecture. And we also use some libraries to facilitate connection with some network devices. Nord-Near is quite interesting because it offers a data collection parallel where we are able to collect configs, statistics, of many equipments simultaneously, and it guarantees a better performance. We also have web formats, reports, and in spreadsheets.
Bom, o MVP era,
MVP,
como o nome diz, era bem mínimo mesmo. Ele suportava apenas fabricantes Juniper e Extreme. As checagens eram baseadas no guia de configuração segura, mas
that was based on a safe connections.
do código, a gente tinha uma interface web mínima.
We had a minimum web interface, a simple database with some textual files.
Sisteminha inicial.
This is the initial system.
Simples, mas
There was a very simple and straightforward idea, very helpful to the process.
Alguns POPs na primeira fase.
Here we have some POPs in the first phase, and here the roadmap with the main progress. We had to redesign the system since the very beginning. We adopted some hierarchy where the device is linked to a site which by itself is related to a group, allowing users to access either a site or another, and there is a much more flexibility. The auditing module was redesigned.
And it takes up the data of the equipment. So this is the basis of the test and rules, where it's able to check these both and see if it is accordingly and finds a way to it. So this allowed also customized check registration. If there's a need for some specific one, they can have this register. We also have
E também é possível concatenar regras. Adicionamos o suporte dos fabricantes Cisco, Huawei.
Well, here we have the
armazenamento de resultados
vendor Cisco, Hawaii, MikroTik, and we also have the other ones.
Então eu vou
Well,
fazer uma demonstração.
Let me start by a demo
A gente entenda.
so we can understand how it works. Just bear with me.
Ok, essa é a home do.
So this is the home of the system, the home page. Here are some general pieces of information where there is a VM here where I have eight equipment, 3 with no problems, 5 with, and others with some other problems here for documentation purposes, which is net audit, where it's this page right here. And here with the biggest number of problems with the one that has evolved. So this type of thing. And this is a graph of level of severity in terms of severity that I reach. So on this page here, we have the basis of the device, where we have them all listed here. So just run an auditing quickly here. So here I select it and I see of access, and here I can execute. They're not really stored in the system. So I need to have the same password. So then you have this in all.
Então ele está executando.
So here is what was mostly affected.
Então isso otimiza aí o tempo de execução.
So you have here the time of execution.
Aqui no laboratório eu tenho equipamentos MikroTik.
Here I have the MikroTik equipment Huawei and this one of Juniper.
Dois extremes rodando no servidor Linux. Então leva alguns segundos.
So this you have for a few seconds.
A página de documentação.
So this is the other one.
Bom, aqui é o resultado da auditoria.
So here is the result of the auditing.
Nós temos o número de equipamentos auditados, o número de...
So here you can see the number that were audited.
Sem problemas, o número de problemas. Aqui algumas informações
And here,
são coletadas do equipamento.
here is the one that is collected.
Temos uma base de versões recomendadas.
So here is a basis
Uma base local que cada administrador vai precisar criar.
of what we have here. You can create this one because the version of software is very specific for each one. You can check if you have the version that is running is the one that is on the base. And here we can see this status. And right down here, we have one line for each test that was executed.
Ele está aplicado e então ele deu OK.
And then okayed it. So here root login.
Não OK, porque ele está permitindo que alguém se logue como root. Então ele já tem a solução nesse.
So here you already have the solution on this last column here for you to solve the problem. So for each line here, you have a no OK. You will see here the solution for the problem. And this is for each equipment. And here we have, it's a long list. And here, on this format, if I want to use this.
Bom, esse aqui é o resultado da auditoria. Vou mostrar rapidamente aqui.
So just really quickly here.
Aqui eu vou selecionar.
So here we will see the whole report of the room, and we see all the equipment and the last auditing that we ran. So we can see here how we all okay, one with mostly all not okay, and on the left the information of the equipment. So this for everyone. And here we download on an Excel file.
E aqui embaixo, mesma coisa.
And here down here the same.
Gráfico de evolução no tempo, né? De issues no tempo.
And here we have the time and severity.
Em cima de device específico. Eu consigo.
So if we go into this, we can see the report for this device specifically. So,
então aqui tem todas as verificações realizadas na auditoria.
Here we have all of this from the last auditing check, and here the equipment info, severity of problems over time, and here the history of all the auditing for this equipment. So if I click here, I can see as if I had run on this equipment alone, where we can see that auditing specifically. So here's the basis of the versions recommended. So here, each one needs to have their own, and each equipment, you need to have a recommended one. This is a specific point, and you'll not have to define that. So let's go back here to this side on rules. So we are able to really see all the rules that are run by default on the system. Here there's junipers, full list, and I could create also a rule that is specific one. So the hierarchy would be one rule associated, one or more associated to a test. So a test will have more. So you could create here a rule to follow something specifically that is not being checked. And then you can create the test. And since I don't have anything here, and then you can have a test here that will be the rule. So for instance, you would basically have what you see here. So here you have no direct rule, and then there are the logic severity, which is calculated based on an international standard, which has the CVSS code, and the solution to this problem if there is the no okay result. And on one text, I have it here. And that way, with a rule, I can see no directed, it checks if this string is present. So it needs to be present. And then you have a match exec, and it's on the same line of configuration. So this brings a greater flexibility if a user wants to follow it and not limiting itself to the default rules of the system. Okay? Here, group websites. So here you get the error, but this is pretty much what you would have. And the documentation page is here on this address where you can have the deployment. It's quite simple. You can just make the repository and have the build of the image of the blocker and alter some parameters of variables and create the database, an admin password, upload the doc, and you're up and ready to go on your server or computer. Well, this was the presentation I had for you. So we have the GitLab on this URL. We have the docs here on netaudit.rnp.br, and this is my email. You can reach me, guilherme.latbocat. So thank you very much for the opportunity for presenting the project, and I am available for all your questions.
Obrigado, Guilherme.
Thank you, Guilherme. And now that we are about to close our event, I'd like to ask everyone to have their forms up. So we're going to have a QR code on the screen so that you can give a grade to all the different presentations we had here. And Guilherme, I'd also like to have you go to our next activity, which is the network space. There we're going to have people answer your questions. So please remain here. Let's just migrate. We're going to go to Gather Town. We're right on the website of IX. We already have the link. So on the IX Fórum website, you'll see the access to the platform, and we're just inviting all our speakers to talk to all of you there. That will be our next activity. So here we have the QR code up, and then we're going to have another QR code so that you can really start there on Gather Town. And then we can interact and talk and address more of the technical topics that were brought up here that is important for an administrator of network. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, all our speakers. We're done with our talks, and now we're going to go to the other platform to talk a bit, to get our questions answered on Gather Town. So let's remember that tomorrow we'll have our last day of IX Fórum 15, and we'll start at 9 a.m. Please do not miss it. We will have many interesting talks, and I should remind you that we will have a talk to IX. So if you have any question to be answered by our IX team, a manager, director will be present, and we will be streaming right on the Gather platform. So if you want to go there, introduce yourself, get a mic, and want to be on the streaming to get the question answered, you have that possibility. So we'll go now to Gather Town for our networking, and tomorrow we will have this streaming on Gather. This is a possibility to interact with the NIC.br employees, IX, and even be on our streaming and to get your question answered. So I'd like to close for now. Thank you everyone for today, for being here with us and watching us on YouTube. And now we'll migrate to the Gather Town platform, which is the interaction platform. Okay, thank you everyone, and I'll see you tomorrow.